Nobody wants to accept defeat. It requires great maturity to be able to accept defeat. Those who don't want to accept defeat keep on fighting, or they try to change the rules and cheat. That is what Putin, who suffered a historic defeat against Ukraine, is doing. Russia realized that it could not win this war against the resistance of the Ukrainian army. Putin decided to use an unusual method to change the situation, but Ukrainian soldiers managed to foil this plan. It was like a movie. Anchored daily news team learned all the details of this event through Ukrainian soldiers. Thanks to this extraordinary effort of our team, the whole world will learn about the heroism of the Ukrainian army. Our team needs support to continue this work. You can support us by using the Super Thanks button below this video. If you are ready, we can now share this extraordinary event with you. When Putin realized that the Russian army was not enough to defeat Ukraine, he thought of an interesting method. He ordered to confiscate the clothes of Ukrainian soldiers captured by the Russian army. Russian soldiers put on the clothes of Ukrainian soldiers and were sent to the war zone. The soldiers were first sent to the Russian-occupied Kharkiv region. At midnight, they were to secretly cross into the area controlled by the Ukrainian army. They would be sent to Chernihiv Oblast, north of Kiev and bordering Belarus. From this area they would launch an attack on the Belarusian border. This would make Belarus think that Ukraine was attacking it. As a result, the Belarusian army would wage war against Ukraine. Putin's plan was quite simple. Similar plans have been implemented. In other words, it is called a false flag operation. Usually states carry out such operations to make themselves look victimized and gain international support. But the false flag operation is nothing but slander. After Putin explained this plan to the Russian commanders, about 100 Russian soldiers were deployed. These soldiers were selected from different battalions. The Russian army assigned the most inexperienced soldiers for this operation because it was thought that these soldiers would be killed by the Belarusian army during the conflict. Putin kept sending soldiers to their deaths. 100 Russian soldiers recruited from 10 different units set off wearing the military uniforms of Ukrainian prisoners. These soldiers were loaded into 5 20-passenger military vehicles. The soldiers crossed into Ukrainian territory in small groups. Only then Ukrainian soldiers noticed them. However, no one suspected them because the Russian soldiers were dressed in Ukrainian military uniforms. But the soldiers at the Ukrainian Army Observation Tower became suspicious of the increase in the number of troops in the area. They started watching the new arrivals through binoculars. All of these soldiers looked very worried, but the Ukrainian army had no plans for a new operation in this area. This ghost soldier became more suspicious and continued to observe them. As he looked through the binoculars, he noticed something extraordinary. There was something strange about the uniforms of these soldiers. The Ukrainian flag crest on the sleeve of the military uniforms was upside down. The spotter immediately informed his commanders. The commanders came to the observation towers and started looking through the binoculars. The upside-down flags were a sign the Ukrainian military knew that Russia had carried out false flag operations in many wars. It was thought that Russia could also carry out such an operation in this war. That's why all the soldiers were trained in this. The captured Ukrainian soldiers were told that they had to remove the flags from their uniforms and glue them upside down. And the captured Ukrainian soldiers did just that. This is how the Russian soldiers were exposed, thanks to a very clever strategy. Zelensky's commanders managed to foil Putin's plan, but it was not easy for Ukrainian soldiers. 100 Russian soldiers had arrived at the base and there were only 20 Ukrainian soldiers. Ukrainian soldiers immediately came up with a plan. First of all, they wanted to scatter the Russian soldiers in different areas. 4 Ukrainian soldiers prepared their rockets. 6 soldiers took over the machine guns. The other 10 soldiers took their weapons and waited for orders for the operation. Ukrainian soldiers first tried to divide the Russian army in two. The soldiers were fired at from 2 different sides. The soldiers at the machine guns fired from 2 different directions, splitting the Russian soldiers in two. At this stage, soldiers with rockets came into play. Russian soldiers were targeted with rockets fired one after the other. The Russian soldiers, who had suffered great losses, realized that they had been exposed. They grabbed their weapons and started to open fire, but guns were useless against the rocket attack. By the time the Ukrainian soldiers ran out of rockets, 56 Russian soldiers had been killed. But there was still more Russian soldiers. But the Russian soldiers were very inexperienced. Ukrainian soldiers continued to fight with great courage. Moreover, strategically, the Ukrainian soldiers were in a more advantageous position. Ukrainian soldiers fired from watchtowers and trenches, but the Russian soldiers were completely unprotected and they had nowhere to run. Ukrainian soldiers used their machine guns very well. After a long battle, 33 more Russian soldiers were killed. The Russian soldiers realized that they could no longer win this battle. They decided to lay down their arms and surrender. 11 Russian soldiers laid down their arms and surrendered. The surrendered Russian soldiers told everything during the interrogation. This is how Putin's false flag operation was exposed. The Ukrainian Northern Operational Command issued a statement on this issue. Ukrainian authorities reported that Russian forces are trying for possible false flag operations in the international border areas of Chernihiv Oblast. The International Institute for the Study of War has also published its latest report on Russia's false flag operations. These reports reveal how desperate Putin is. Putin is furious that this plan is not working. Putin is doing his best to involve Belarus in this war, but without success. It is now almost impossible for the Russian army to win this war. All Putin's plans are running out. Zelensky's government has made a very strong preparation against all Putin's plans since the beginning of the war. All of Putin's attack plans have been successfully thwarted. Ukrainian intelligence is also working hard to expose Russia's attack plans. As a result of these efforts, it is known that many of Russia's attack plans have been exposed. The Russian military is suffering from a major intelligence failure. Many senior officials in Russia believe that this war must end as soon as possible. That is why some Russian officials are believed to be sharing classified information with the Ukrainian government. Ukrainian intelligence is doing top-secret work and intercepting Putin's plans. Putin is going crazy as all his plans are exposed. What do you think about Russia's false flag operation? What else do you think Putin will do to get the Belarusian army to join this war? What do you think about the exposure of Putin's plans? What do you think about the work of Ukrainian intelligence and military? Do you think the Ukrainian military tactics were successful in this operation? What are states? This is a big question that philosophers, thinkers, and academics have been debating for hundreds of years. But in the simplest terms, the states exist to ensure the security and peace of the people. But what happens if people are not safe and peaceful? Throughout history, the answer to this question has never changed. People without security and peace will always revolt. These revolts can lead to historical events. There have been many regional and global changes as a result of popular uprisings. The uprisings in Russia are expected to affect the whole world. But how will this happen? What is happening in the revolts in Russia? Can the Russian rebels really change world history completely in order to answer all these questions? As Anchor Daily News team, we conducted a comprehensive research. We have summarized the latest developments in the riots in Russia and the analysis of our expert team for you. This research, which is the result of a great deal of effort, contains a striking information. You can support us for the continuation of such news and the development of independent journalism. For this, you can use the Super Thanks button below the video. Let's start if you're ready. While doing research on this topic, we have analyzed a lot of data showing that world history is on the verge of a major turning point. The revolts in Russia will reshape international relations and the structure of states all over the world. The possibility of these revolts spreading to other countries is also very high. Before we talk about the effects of the revolts, let's look at what the Russian rebels are doing right now. The riots in Russia are currently taking three different forms. First, there are the protests of the Russian people in the squares and on the streets. These protests have been going on since the beginning of the war after Russia decided to invade Ukraine. Thousands of Russian citizens started rioting in the Red Square, but the Russian police are very harsh against the rioters. Russian leader Putin does not care about any democratic rules. That's why he's trying to prevent people's right to protest. Russian citizens protesting against Putin are being arrested with very harsh interventions. After the Russian police arrested thousands of people, the impact of the protest diminished, but the Russian people never gave up. Different protests are taking place in many regions of Russia. Russian people started to write many slogans on the wall. "This is Putin's war, not ours." This phrase is now heard everywhere in Russia. Russian people have started writing it on the walls. It has become a powerful slogan for Russians against the war. Many artists in Russia are also sharing this phrase on social media. The second method of riots is social media. Russians organize themselves on social media and make the protests more powerful. In addition, social media posts lead to an increase in the number of anti-Putin supporters in Russia. Putin also puts pressure on social media platforms, but the Russian people continue to find solutions against these pressures. The third method of rebellion is Putin's worst nightmare. Some of the Russian rebels are joining the Ukrainian army. These rebels are doing everything they can to make sure that the war ends as soon as possible and Putin's regime collapses. A very famous politician in Russia is leading this group. Former Russian MP Ilya Ponomarev is the pioneer of this group. Ponomarev quickly became one of the most famous MPs in the country for his speeches. Ponomarev has always opposed Putin's aggressive policies. With this war started, he made dozens of calls for Russia to withdraw, but Putin refuses to withdraw. According to Ponomarev, if the Ukrainian army wins the war, it will be the end of Putin's rule. If Putin out of power, Russia can start implementing peaceful and liberal policies. That is why Ponomarev supports the Ukrainian army. Accompanying Ponomarev is one of Russia's most famous journalists, Alexei Baranovsky. Baranovsky openly states that he would like to see Kremlin in flames. And this is not impossible for them because Russia's most elite soldiers are acting together with them. Ponomarev has managed to bring together the Freedom of Russia Legion, a volunteer unit of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and the Army of the National Republic, a partisan network operating secretly in Russia. These two armies carry out operations against the Russian army. In these operations, Russian ammunition depots are particularly targeted. These soldiers know the Russian army very well. That's why they identify strategic targets when they operate. This unit of rebels inflicts heavy losses on the Russian army. The number of people who want to join this unit is increasing every day. By arresting the protesters, Putin has made them more radicalized. Those who want to protest against Putin are now much braver and tougher, so they are not hesitating to join an armed war against Putin. Also, Putin's arresting the rebels is not working. Many prisons in Russia have run out of space. Russian rebels continue to rebel in prisons. According to the Russian press, many prisons are on strike. The rebellions of Russian rebels are growing everywhere. Experts say that these riots could get out of control at any moment. The anger of the Russian people is growing every day. A massive protest that will spread all over Russia could start at any moment. Russian rebels are making preparations to start a major uprising. The Russian people could change world history as a result of this revolt. And how could this happen? The Russian Federation has a very complex structure. There are 22 republics in the Russian Federation, which is the continuation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Putin, who has ruled Russia since 1999, has been oppressing all of these countries. The Russian Federation has been practicing repressive and aggressive policies for many years, especially since the Second World War. There has been a great tension between the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. Russia is considered the leader of the Eastern Bloc, but the Russian people don't want that. Russian citizens want to live like Westerners in order to be a free country, especially as a result of the development of technology and global communication networks. The number of pro-Westerners in Russia has started to increase. Russian people can achieve this by starting a big revolt. Experts analyzing the consequences of the uprising in Russia have important predictions. According to the experts, the first result of a major revolt could be Putin's resignation. If the Russian people take over the Kremlin palace, Putin may be forced to flee Russia. After that, the states of the Russian Federation will increase their demands for independence. The Russian Federation may disintegrate. In this case, Russia will lose its former political power. The new government in Russia will be expected to develop good relations with the West. Efforts will be made to integrate Russia into the West in a short period of time. In this case, the Eastern Bloc will lose great power and the global balance of power will change completely. This could lead to a reduction in conflicts and wars all over the world. The tension between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc has created great insecurity all over the world. But if the Eastern Bloc collapses, the whole world could become safer. What do you think about the rebellions in Russia and how do you think they're affecting the course of the war? What do you think about the Russian rebels joining the Ukrainian army? Do you think Putin could be removed from office as a result of a major uprising in Russia? Or do you think about the impact of the uprisings in Russia and international relations? A lot of news is coming from almost all parts of the front line. First of all, when it comes to the battle for Bakhmut, it seems like the Russians did not abandon their plans of taking control over the Champagne winery. Yesterday I told you that the Russians just assaulted Sined factory and moved south into the residential area. But today they have also moved north towards the Champagne factory. This means that the fights are taking place in 3 places simultaneously, which is quite intense given the recent losses of Wagner forces. Due to precision strikes, such an increase in intensity is highly likely to be temporary. The Russians likely understood that by moving slowly in this particular area, they were playing by the Ukrainian rules who have established multiple fallback positions here. So they likely decided to make a final push to establish control over the eastern bank of the pond and decrease their losses in the long run. When it comes to the northern part of the region, today, the Russians destroyed the second railway bridge that connected Bakhmut with Soledar and Siversk. As you remember, previously, they destroyed the smaller one that led only to Soledar. And today they also reportedly destroyed the bigger one that went through Soledar to Siversk. This has significantly diminished the ability of the Ukrainians to maneuver along the front line. Fortunately, Ukrainian military command reported that the rotation process has still been completed, so the Ukrainians have plenty of time to organize their logistics by the time they need to make their next move. The Iranians are doing the same to the Russians in the south. A few days ago, in Melitopol, a bridge that connects eastern and western Zaporizhia regions was destroyed. Images show that spans of M14 bridge across the Molotchna River have collapsed. Russian occupation officials claimed that the damage was done by Ukrainian saboteurs who detonated around 20 kilograms of explosives. Russian officials also claimed that the bridge attack did not affect Russian logistics routes between Melitopol and Crimea. And this is true because this bridge has nothing to do with Crimea. This bridge destroyed the main connection between Melitopol and Berdyansk. Unfortunately, there is a second bridge around 10 kilometers down the stream that is big enough to handle heavy equipment. When the Ukrainians destroyed the second bridge as well, the Russians will be forced to go through Tokmak, and Tokmak is located only 25 kilometers from the front, which makes it extremely difficult to transport a lot of equipment without parts of the convoys being destroyed. Today, the Russians also launched a drone attack on the capital of Ukraine. Kiev has experienced 2 waves of attack. The Russians launched around 15 Shahed drones targeting energy facilities. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, 13 drones were successfully shot down. US officials stated that the Pentagon is finalizing plans to send Patriot missile defense systems to Ukraine. The US officials expect to receive the necessary approvals in around 2 days. It is still unclear how many Patriot missile systems the Pentagon plan would provide Ukraine, But one thing is clear for sure: the Russians will have a harder time conducting their missile and drone attacks. The Ukrainian military is now also more protected against Russian hacker attacks because Estonia helped Ukraine to build a military cybersecurity facility. As you might remember, last month, Russian hackers allegedly hacked Ukrainian Delta combat detection mechanism. Even though there is little evidence that the attack was successful, it is still a great cause for concern, as they could have potentially leaked all Ukrainian artillery positions. But with the new cybersecurity facility that Estonia had been helping with for more than 8 months, such attacks should become less of a threat. Interestingly, even though Russia started a full-on war against Ukraine, only 2% of its cyber attacks targeted Ukraine based on the recent Microsoft Digital Defense report. 55% of cyber attacks originating in Russia targeted the United States, 8% targeted the United Kingdom, and 3% targeted Canada and Germany. When it comes to industries, 29% of Russian-sponsored attacks targeted the IT sector, 18% non-governmental organizations, 12% governmental and educational establishments, and 5% financial. So if you are working in IT, finance, or governmental establishments, then you run a significant risk of suffering a cyber attack.